Some of you are on the right track, but the wrong train. Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. Before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video and subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a bell. That bell is for notifications. It'll notify you the next time we release a video. If you happen to be on Rumble, though, to your upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a share button. Click that button and it'll share this video with a friend. Go ahead and do all of those that apply right now. Rise of the Black Conservative. That's the focus of today's podcast. We got a lot to unpack here today. We're going to be talking today about why 2016 was a game changer for blacks. We're also going to be talking about how we got here in the first place. By here, I mean in the Democrat Party. We're going to be talking about how those who don't know their past, you know the rest, are doomed to repeat it. We'll talk about why we haven't returned to the Republican Party, at least fully. And then we'll summarize everything today talking about the title of today's podcast, The Rise of the Black Conservative. Well, 2016 ended up being an interesting year for blacks because we saw something happen that we didn't think was going to happen, and that is we actually saw Donald Trump put his hat in the ring to run for president. Now, he had been saying he was going to run for president numerous times, but he always backed out at the last minute. But this time, in 2016, he actually did run, and to many people's surprise, even the Republican parties, he won. But not only did he win, but he won 8% of the black vote. Now, I've heard a lot of people say to get 8% black support from the Republican Party, it's pretty doggone good. But you know how I am. I'm not the type of person that just goes off of what I heard. I do some research. And what was interesting is when I did some research, here's what I found. Now, this particular chart I found here online, and it happens to be from Forbes, so take it for what it's worth. But the reason why I decided to go with this chart is because it gave me a lot more data than I was actually looking for. It actually tracks the GOP's share of the black vote all the way from 1932 to 2020. And so I thought it was pretty interesting because if you look here at 2016, you'll see that Trump had 8% of the black vote. But if you go back from 2016, you'll see that he didn't set any big records per se. I mean, 8% was good, but it's not like he knocked that out of the park. As a matter of fact, if you go back like to 1980, look at that, 14%, 1976, 17%. But during my lifetime, which I was born in 1969, I'd say in my lifetime at least, that we've had more people who had a larger share. But Trump's share of the black vote isn't the reason why I say 2016 was a game changer for blacks. The reason why I say it was a game changer for blacks because something appeared different about this particular time. Many times when blacks voted for the Republican Party, they tend to have done so quietly. But we started noticing something in 2016 that I hadn't before. And it all started when I saw Diamond and Silk. Now, I'll be honest, I had no idea who these two black women were when they came out in support of Trump. The only thing the media kept showing is that these two black women were really fired up about Trump. They were ditching the Democrat Party and they were switching over to Republican just to support this guy Trump. Now, right around this same time, there was another individual who was starting to make some waves, and her name was Candace Owens. Now, Candace's message was slightly different than that of Diamond and Silk's. Candace's message was, I'm supporting Donald Trump as a Republican, but I'm also trying to encourage as many blacks as I can to leave the Democrat Party and go back to what we used to be, which were Republicans. What we used to be? She say what blacks used to be? Republican? Have you ever had this experience before? Maybe you've been watching a television show or a movie, and then somewhere around the middle of the TV show or movie, you have a friend or family member who comes in, and they sit down and watch the show, and they'll make a comment about something that's going on in the show. Maybe they'll say something like, oh, I like that character. And then you have to turn to them and say, oh, no. You don't want to like that character. That guy just killed somebody. I know you just came in, but let me catch you up to speed on what's really happening, right? Well, this is kind of how I feel when I talk to some of my black Democrat friends. Maybe we're watching the Republican National Convention or something like that, and then I got to hear some snide comment like, did you see how many black people were at the Republican National Convention? What were there, 3 black people? Yeah, way to diversify, guys. And then I want to turn to them, hey, I know you just came in, but a whole lot happened while you were gone. Let me catch you up to speed. In that same Forbes article I talked about, it goes on to say, prior to 1936, a majority of black voters supported Republicans due to the Republican Party's historic role in ending slavery. However, the Great Depression and the New Deal led the majority of African Americans to switch allegiances to the Democrats starting in 1936. Now let's go back to that chart that I showed you before. Remember that chart that I showed you before? It goes all the way back and tracks the GOP share of the black vote from 1932 all the way up until 2020. Well, if you go back to 1932, you'll see that the GOP share of the black vote was as high as 77%. That means more than half the black people you'd meet back in 1932 were Republicans. So how did we get here? How do we go from an era where more than half of the black people that you'd meet in 1932 were part of the Republican Party to today where more than half of the black people that you'd meet will be part of the Democrat Party? Well, the story that the Democrats like to tell is that black people left the Republican Party in droves during the 60s, during the Civil Rights Bill. But that's not accurate at all. Even the chart suggests that black people left the Republican Party long before any Civil Rights Bill in the 60s. Black people left the Republican Party way back in 1936 when FDR was elected. There's a phrase that says those who don't know their past are doomed to repeat it. I was invited to be on a Zoom call by one of my childhood friends who happens to be a Democrat. And I remember when he invited me on the call, I felt like it was a setup. I said, oh, okay, you're inviting me into the lion's den, right? There's a bunch of Democrats on there. He says, oh, no. He says, I'm not inviting you there as a setup or anything like that. You just have a different opinion, and I wanted to invite you on the call. Sure enough, he invited me on the call, and it wasn't a setup, to be fair. It wasn't a setup. I didn't feel like that at all. But we eventually got to the point where we were talking about the minimum wage. Now, I was under the misguided impression that if people disagreed over financial topics, it usually stemmed from a lack of education somewhere. But here I was, invited on this Zoom call, and I could tell that the people were educated before we even got started. I could hear them talking amongst each other about they had just got back from Martha's Vineyard, etc. So I was looking forward to our conversation about the minimum wage and how it affected black people. And there I was, talking to at least a dozen educated people about the effects of the minimum wage on black people, and none of them got it. And it really became frustrating because it wasn't like I had just gave my opinion of how it affected black people. I gave them all of the data. I gave them the articles to read. I gave them what the stats were from the Labor Bureau and Statistics. I gave them real life scenarios. I even posed a question directly to them of how they would handle it if they knew someone who was in need and they needed to earn some money, but you didn't have it in the budget to pay them the minimum wage. What would you do? The answer from all of them is they just let the person starve. No joke. And I remember scratching my head and thinking after I got off this Zoom call, how can so many educated people, so many black educated people from universities, how could they be so naive that they couldn't see that the minimum wage was actually helping to keep poor black people poor? And for some reason, this thought crossed my mind. I don't know if it was something God was trying to show me, but for some reason, I thought back to slavery times when the slave master actually separated, divided blacks into two groups. There were the blacks who lived in the house, and then there were the blacks who actually worked out in the field. And when you watch those movies, it makes you scratch your head in a similar fashion when you see that the blacks who are in the field are the ones most likely who'd want to be free. They're already outside. It's not that far of an idea for you to just keep on running. More often than not, if there was anyone who was likely to tell on you or talk you out of running, it was going to be that person who lived in the house, the one who got all of the benefits. More on this later. Many times when you speak to black people about our history, we're really big on talking about our hidden history, right? Things that were kept from us, but usually people think, they assume that this hidden history is from Africa. But there's a lot of hidden history that happened right here in the United States. There are a lot of us that are walking around that don't realize that the first black senators were Republican. Here's your first homework assignment. Do some research to find out who the first black senators were and type it down in the comments section. The history of the United States is really interesting. There's a lot of different ways that a person can explain the history of the United States, but usually when people choose to explain the history of the United States, they do it in a way that makes it very complicated. I don't like to complicate things. I like to simplify things, and sometimes I get accused of oversimplifying things. Well, here's another example of me oversimplifying something. If you were to simplify both of the parties, really, they can be summarized in this way. Both of the parties, if you really give it some thought, can really be summarized in these two different ways. There's freedom on the right, and there's bondage on the left. I told you this isn't going to be pretty. If Adam Smith can be called the father of capitalism on the right, then Karl Marx can be called the father of socialism on the left. These two represent their party to the T. I said I was going to do a podcast one of these days on the words and phrases that the left use in an attempt to hide what really goes on. One of the phrases that I dislike personally is I really don't like the phrase Civil War. The reason I don't like the phrase Civil War is because it kind of confiscates what actually went on. I'd prefer they call it what it was, which is the war between Republicans and Democrats. See, if they phrased it that way, then the first question that might cross your mind is, well, what were they fighting about? The second question that may cross your mind is, well, who won? Because once you had the answer to those two questions, it would make everything else in life just fall in line. You'd understand why you have to constantly deal with people who are obviously lying. Like this plaque at Northeastern Illinois University that says Abraham Lincoln was a Democrat. And you should read their website as to the justification why they say this is the truth. But if you understood that Democrats lost the Civil War, then you might understand their motivation for trying to suggest that Abraham Lincoln was a Democrat. If you're a black conservative, you darn near have to be a detective just to get to the truth, because no mainstream media is ever going to tell you to be proud of your conservative heritage. How many black people do you know during Black History Month championed Harriet Tubman? They championed Frederick Douglass. But if you talk to them about a real life, modern day Republican or conservative, they look at them with contempt. And yet, if you're watching Harriet Tubman today, no one will tell you that she fought with the Republican Party. No one will tell you Frederick Douglass fought with the Republican Party. You almost have to be a detective. Look at this photo. Who is she in the boat with? That uniform those soldiers are wearing, those are Union soldiers. When you see the other photo, when she's standing in front of the army she's standing to fight and plan with, those are Union soldiers. This is Harriet Tubman fighting with the Republicans, fighting against Democrats. But somehow that message never gets conveyed. This is why I like to do my own research. I don't like to read about stuff. I like to find it out on my own, if at all possible. For instance, I live in Georgia. I don't want to read about Stone Mountain and where the KKK used to meet. I live here, so I'd like to go visit it myself so that I can report certain things to you. I remember when my wife and I visited Stone Mountain. I told her, I said, we may want to record this because there will come a day when the Democrats are going to try to erase those carvings on the side of Stone Mountain in an effort to erase their racist past. And guess what? I was right. Now, the carving is still there. There are some legal entanglements with regards to them removing the actual carving off the mountain. However, what I find suspicious is that if you go to Stone Mountain Park's website, the one thing that you won't find on the entire website for Stone Mountain is an actual picture of the mountain. Do you know who's actually carved on the side of Stone Mountain? Type it in the comments section. I don't know if you know it off the top of your head or if you have to do some research, but type the names of the individuals who are actually carved in the side of Stone Mountain. We've got a real life Hatfield-McCoy type feud here when it comes to politics in America. As a matter of fact, you might not have known this, but do you realize that Stone Mountain actually opened 100 years almost to the day of Abraham Lincoln's death? Well, you probably already know that the war between Republicans and Democrats was fought over slavery. You probably already know that the war between Republicans and Democrats was led by Republican President Abraham Lincoln. You probably already know that the war between Republicans and Democrats was won by Republicans, and you probably know that that same Republican president signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So you'd probably understand why most black people would be Republican. So what went wrong? Let's cover the part that you don't know. Here's a photo of 20,000 fascists all gathered together. You may say, so what? What's the big deal? The big deal is this isn't Italy. It's not Germany. Nope. This is New York City, Madison Square Garden, 1939. The next time someone talks to you about right-wing fascism, I want you to remember what I'm getting ready to show you. This is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933. This is the president that blacks made the switch to the Democrat Party for. Now, people always discuss FDR when talking about the subject of the Great Depression, but there's some other information about FDR that rarely ever gets discussed. FDR once referred to this man as that admirable Italian gentleman. The only problem is this person that you see on your screen is Benito Mussolini, Hitler's mentor. Google the phrase admirable Italian gentleman and you'll get a great education that you probably never learned about in school. FDR was actually a huge fan of Mussolini. Now you might think I'm making this up, or maybe that the Google links that you're looking at right now are wrong. Fortunately, someone recorded a very disturbing event that took place on February 20th, 1939. Remember, FDR was elected in 1933, and in 1939, this video will give you a great feeling of how Americans felt about fascism at the time.
My name is Marshall Curry, and I am the director of A Night at the Garden, a short documentary that's been nominated for an Academy Award. The film is about a rally that took place in New York, in Madison Square Garden in 1939, when 20,000 Americans gathered for a Nazi rally. The whole film is made of archival footage. There's no voiceover, there are no interviews. It sort of parachutes the viewer into this rally and without explanation. And when you first arrive, you see people protesting outside, maybe not so sure what's going on. The marquee outside describes it as a pro-America rally, and then we go inside, you see people marching in with American flags, and there's a huge 30-foot portrait of George Washington. But then you start to look a little closer and you realize that there's swastikas on either side of him, and that the people are holding flags that have swastikas, and they start to do the Nazi salute. And you discover that this rally is sort of using the icons of American patriotism to sell anti-Semitism and hate.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, American patriots.
The rally was organized by a group called the Bund, which was sort of the American Nazi party at that point. They shared a Nazi ideology of anti-Semitism, not wanting Jews to have positions of power. The leader talks during the rally about the importance of taking America back from the Jews who were destroying it.
What we are actively fighting for under our charter: first, a social, just, white, Gentile, ruled United States. Second, Gentile-controlled labor union, free from Jewish Moscow-directed domination.
During the rally, a protester runs out on stage, and he is a man named Isidore Greenbaum, who was a 20-something-year-old plumber's assistant from Brooklyn, Jewish, who came to the rally that night just to kind of check it out, and was so moved and outraged by what he was seeing on stage that he ran out on stage. You see him grabbed by the forces of the American Nazis who were on the stage, and they beat him and rip his pants off and throw him off the stage. And it's a really brutal and sort of frightening moment. It sort of triggers this mob mentality that allows them to laugh and cheer as somebody gets beaten up, and as somebody speaks, hatred towards a group of people that are going to be murdered by the millions in the next couple of years. You know that if there's a rally where 20,000 people show up, that there are many, many thousands of people beyond that who didn't come out that night but share the philosophy. And I think America in the 1930s, anti-Semitism, discrimination against Jews and other minority groups was not the mainstream philosophy, not the majority of Americans' philosophy, but it was a legitimate philosophy.
Can you imagine being black back then, voting for FDR, and seeing that event take place? This is 76 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Black people left freedom for this. This is sad. This is really worth crying about. Americans today will have you believe that we always hated Hitler, but you can see now that is not true. This is Madison Square Garden. This is 1939. Hitler didn't die until 1945, so Hitler is still alive at this point, and you can see that both Mussolini and Hitler have quite a fan base, and that fan base goes all the way up to the Democratic president. You know what saddens me? What saddens me is that we as black people, we saved the Democrat Party. They lost the Civil War, and we turned right around and voted for them. And then what do blacks get in return after having voted for the Democrat Party and FDR?
The whole block of Dixiecrat racists went to FDR, all Democrats, by the way, and FDR goes, I need your support for the New Deal. And they go on two conditions. Number one, we have to design the New Deal to cut out blacks. Now, we can't say blacks, so let's exclude agricultural labor and domestic service, which happen to be the two professions in which blacks are heavily occupied. Let's exclude them from Social Security. Let's exclude them from New Deal benefits. FDR agreed. In fact, that's how the programs were written. Demand number two. The Dixiecrats said to FDR, you must also agree to block all anti-lynching laws. Think about this. To block all anti-lynching laws. FDR agreed again, and worked behind the scenes to suppress anti-lynching legislation with the help of Northern Democrats. Northern Democrats. This is very important again because, as you know, in the progressive narrative, there are the following villains. America's to blame. The South is to blame. The white man is to blame. The North is always exempt. And interestingly, the Democratic Party is never mentioned. But all of this is a little bit of a scam. America's to blame? I mean, America doesn't do anything. Some Americans do things and other Americans fight them. So we have to get right to who are the actual bad guys.
Without being judgmental, I've tried to put myself in my ancestors' shoes and figure out what could have been going on in their mind at the time. What could have made them enter into such a Faustian bargain to where they're actually in bed with the very racists that they used to run from? And the only thing that I could come up with, and I could be wrong, but it's the only thing that I could come up with, is I don't know if you've ever known anyone who's gone to prison. If you've ever known anyone to go to prison, I imagine that when a person gets out of prison that they may be saying to themselves, yes, I'm free, but free to do what? Most of their family has moved on. They don't have any education, very little skills. So maybe in their mind, freedom, in some sense, doesn't have much value to it. And I wondered if that's what crossed our ancestors' minds, to where the benefits of the New Deal that FDR was offering seemed more attractive than just being free. And when I talk to my Democrat friends, it makes it very hard for me to talk to them because many of them know that blacks switched over to the Democrat Party despite their racist backgrounds, and all they have to say for it is, well, what is the Republican Party doing for black people? What are they offering to black people? And I want to tell them so bad, but I'm sorry, there's no Social Security that you could offer me. There's no universal health care that you could offer me. There's no affirmative action that you could offer me that could ever make it worth it for empowering a racist. I'll get it on my own. Do yourself a favor. If you catch yourself making disparaging comments about the decisions that our black ancestors made back then, don't do that. Because as sad as it is, as discouraging as it is, I've done a little research, and what's really puzzling is that this is pretty common among a lot of the cultures. I'd say all of the cultures. I watched a video from Ben Shapiro, and he was having the same issue. A video here that says why Jews vote for the left. Immigrants do the same thing. Nothing is more puzzling to me than to see someone who just fled socialism in their old country only to come to the United States and vote for the very socialism that they were just running from a year ago. So why haven't we returned to the Republican Party? I mean, it's been long enough that we realize blacks aren't really moving ahead since they've been voting Democrat, have they? Well, there are several reasons for that. The first one is the equivocation game. Equivocation basically means even if you do get a Democrat to admit that there was racism in the Democrat Party, they'll just equivocate and try to brush it off by saying, well, there was racism on all sides. It wasn't just us. And the first name they'll probably bring up is David Duke. Dinesh D'Souza once made a bold claim. He said that of the 4 million slaves in 1860, not one of them were owned by a Republican. Now that's a pretty bold claim, and even when he said it at the time, I said, Well, I know people aren't robots. People are people, so that means that they have their faults. So I'm pretty sure if there is a claim out there that Republicans own slaves, someone's going to bring it to them. With all these academics out there, someone's going to do their research to prove him wrong. And sure enough, turns out that Dinesh D'Souza was wrong. But here's the thing that's interesting. He said that years ago, probably around 2018 or so, he made that claim. And of all this time, he's only come up with about 10. Let that sink in. There were 4 million slaves in 1860. He's only had people to prove about 10 Republicans owned slaves. Roughly what that means is Dinesh wasn't too far off, because out of 4 million slaves, if you can only find about 10 of them that were owned by Republicans, that in essence is saying about 99% of all of the slaves were owned by Democrats. In addition to equivocation, another hurdle that's holding black people back from joining the Republican Party is this ideal or premise that somehow slavery was built into America's founding. Slavery was not built into America's founding. Let me give you an analogy. Slavery was a global phenomenon that existed way before America. As a matter of fact, as you're watching this, there are people still being enslaved right now. If you were a slave and you were running away, what is the greatest concern that you have in your mind at that time? Isn't it being recaptured? I mean, that's the absolute worst thing that you can imagine happen. You would probably fight a dog with your bare hands. You'd fight a bear or a tiger with your bare hands. But the one thing that you don't want to happen when you're running away is to be recaptured, because the repercussions for being recaptured could be as catastrophic as your death. Put that in the context of America. When America was founded, they only had a handful of colonies that's going to participate in this endeavor. Certainly, their greatest concern at that point in time is getting recaptured by England. My point is, if you only have a handful of allies and one of your allies happens to have a proclivity for slavery, which is a global phenomenon at this point, your attitude is probably going to be like, we'll deal with your issue later. But right now, the biggest issue is making sure that we don't get recaptured from the place we just ran from. Another one of the hurdles that's blocking most blacks from returning to the Republican Party in droves is this pervasive myth that all white people are racist. It's a narrative that's put forth by the Democrat Party. The question most people never seem to ask themselves, and it's a very simple question. You wonder why most people don't ask themselves that. Hey, if there was a war between Republicans and Democrats, obviously one side was for slavery, well, who was fighting on the other side? If there were whites fighting for slavery, don't you think there were whites also fighting against it? But no one ever asked that question, because then it would shoot down the entire narrative that all white people are racist. Can't have that going around. Then you'd have to ask the question too about these abolitionists. Who are these people who started the abolitionist movement? Who are these people who fought against slavery from the very beginning? You can't start asking questions like that, because if you ask questions like that, then you might stumble across people like William Lloyd Garrison, who was a slavery abolitionist from the very beginning. You can't start asking questions like that, because if you ask questions about the war and the casualties, you might discover that the casualties of the Civil War was anywhere between 620,000 to 750,000 as estimates, and 360,000 of those were of the Union, Republicans, white people fighting against slavery. Then there's this 3/5 clause. That's another hurdle that's preventing blacks from rejoining the Republican Party in droves. Let some people tell it, this 3/5 clause in the Constitution meant that the founders believed blacks were only 3/5 of a human being. The 3/5 clause only existed because Democrats who owned slaves tried to have their cake and eat it too, in a sense. They had blacks classified as property when it suited them, but then when it came time for voting purposes, they turned right around and said that those same blacks were people. And then the Republicans in the North said, oh, no, you don't. You can't decide when you want them to be people and when you want them to be property. This back and forth negotiation between Republicans and Democrats was all in an effort to maybe get Democrats to realize that blacks were people, but no such luck. So in an effort to keep the Union together, the 3/5 compromise was agreed to. Another common objection that I hear from blacks about why they haven't returned to the Republican Party is because Republicans don't give us anything. They're so accustomed to Democrats giving them something, they always say, well, what's in it for me? What are they going to do for me? And this is a catch-22 personally. Matter of fact, let me know in the comments section what you think about this. Now, personally, I feel part of the reason why you don't see Republicans giving you anything is because Republicans have always been about minimal government, right? In order for you to be able to pay for all of those things that everyone wants, that means an expansion of government, which is a contradiction of their very principles in the first place. So Republicans have always been more about getting out of the way and just letting you be free. It's not that we're trying to give you anything. We'll just reduce regulations to allow you to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do. But all that being said, if you still wanted a Republican that gave you something, last I checked, it was Trump who gave historically black colleges and universities permanent funding. Last I checked, it was Trump who finally passed criminal justice reform. Barack Obama didn't do that.
I'm feeling no handcuffs, nothing on me. I'm free to hug my family. I'm free to live life. I'm free to start over. I cannot. This is the greatest day of my life. I cannot. My heart is just bursting with gratitude for what has taken place.
You caught a lot of flack.
Yes.
After tweeting this compliment to the president. You wrote, "Give this man his due." At Real Donald Trump is on his way to becoming the uniter-in-chief on an issue that has divided America for generations. Congrats to everyone on both sides who fought for this. Were you scared to tweet a compliment to the president?
You know what? I knew it was going to offend people, but here's what I know. I was raised by decent people. And if I'm going to kick your butt when you're wrong, I got to be equally excited when you're right. I can't be a hypocrite. I can't be a hypocrite. And what we have to begin to understand is we let Twitter frighten us from doing the right thing. My worst day on Twitter is better than anybody's best day in prison. You have to understand that. You're never gonna, Twitter cannot stop. Listen, if you're on Twitter saying Van Jones is a sellout, here's what I know. God bless you. You're not in prison because they don't have Twitter in prison. So I don't have to listen to you. You can't run me. I've got to deal with the reality. We got 200,000 people behind bars just in the federal system alone. They're in Donald Trump's hands right now. He could crush them or pardon them all and let them go. And they deserve the same advocacy under a Republican president as under a Democratic president. And we cannot sit back here and say to ourselves, well, I'm afraid what someone will say about me if I go.
Last I checked, blacks had a 5.4% unemployment rate under Trump. Someone do a homework assignment and find out what the black unemployment rate is now under Joe Biden. I'll wait. Put that in the comments section. Trump also had meetings with Lil Wayne. Trump even put Sweden on blast because they held one of our Americans, rapper A$AP Rocky, unfairly. Well, I opened this segment with a phrase that you may be unfamiliar with. I opened by saying some of you are on the right track, but the wrong train. Let me explain what that means. Before Jay-Z was a rapper, everyone knows he was a drug dealer. This is a perfect example of someone who wants more out of life, wants to be successful, is probably smart, but the application of his skill set is wrong. Right track, wrong train. I'm so proud to see many of our brothers and sisters who are actually starting their own businesses and making their own way. They're taking care of themselves, they're taking care of their family, and all of that is great. But time and time again, I see too many of us fighting for our independence on one hand and then voting for our own destruction in the other. The Democrat Party constantly shows us that they despise the very wealth we seek to enjoy. You're on the right track, but the wrong train. If there is anyone on this green earth that should be championing freedom from the highest mountain possible, it should be us. There is absolutely, positively no excuse for any black person to be associated with anything like socialism and bondage. It's time for a return to the Republican Party. And not just blacks, I'm talking all of us. But I'll tell you why today's message is specifically crafted for black people. Because politics is actually downstream from culture. And there are 5 words that give me hope that we can actually turn this thing around. Want to know what the 5 words are? Black people control the cool. You know black people control the cool. We don't even have to tell you that. If we make a song called Bling Bling about a year from now, all mainstream media will be using it when we don't even say it anymore. Everyone's trying to play catch up with whatever we're doing. That word now that you hear everybody saying on Fox News and CNN, woke, guess where it started? You guessed it. Black people control the cool. It almost doesn't matter what it is. Black people look cooler doing it. Yep, even being a billionaire. So now is the time to show your power. Let's be consistent. Put your weight behind the party that always acknowledged your freedom. We saved the Democrat Party when we shouldn't have. So now it's time to make Republicans cool again. I know we can do it because I'm already seeing it. There's no comparison. Here's the old Republicans. And here's the new Republicans.
So here go my single dog, radio needs us. They say you can rap about anything except for Jesus. That means gun, sex, lies, videotape. But if I talk about God, my record won't get played. Well, if this take away from my spins, which will probably take away from my ends, I know it take away from my sins. Bring the day that we dream about. Next time we on a plane, everybody's screaming out, Jesus walk.
Did I lie? I had the opportunity to go to a Young Black Leadership Summit a few years ago, and I chose not to go. The reason I chose not to go is because I really got the feeling that they were looking for some younger people, and I'm a bit older, so I just figured I'd let the young people have it. But right after the event had passed, I had a bunch of people who sent me messages and say, man, you should have come. Nobody cares about that stuff. Just come out there and support the cause. And I really wish I had gone because I saw so many people out there that looked like they had an awesome time. I've never seen anything like this stuff before, and it's so exciting me that black people are finally getting it. About 2 weeks ago, John Stossel just did a news story about the rise of citizen journalists. It turns out that so many people are getting frustrated with fake news that they're starting to report the news on their own. They're starting to go to the actual locations and see what it's like for themselves. I agree, it is on the rise. And one of the fastest segments that I'm starting to see on the rise is the rise of black conservative political commentators. Mainstream media, you're fooling no one. Shout out to the black conservatives who are out there making it happen and leading by example.
Hey y'all! Hey. Okay, so today we are going to the Board of Elections so we can change our party to Republican. Oh, yes. And I know y'all didn't think we were going to do it.
No, they didn't think so.
But we doing it, and we doing it today. Oh.
Today you know them as Diamond and Silk, but believe it or not, when they first came on the scene, they were simply known as the Stump for Trump girls. Now, some on the left made fun of them because they really didn't know how to take them. Because the left is so used to entertainment only being for them, right? I mean, if this were the Bill Maher show or the Daily Show, they'd understand. But they can't seem to process that what Diamond and Silk really do is the same thing. And boy, do they have a following. My wife and I had a great time. We laughed a lot. We got to meet a lot of great people who we still communicate with to this day. And of course, my wife and I got a chance to take a photo with the dynamic duo. You guys rock. But I haven't had the opportunity to meet all of these heroes in person. Some of them I just admired from afar. Antonia Okafor is a gun rights advocate.
Who's that? With me now, Democratic strategist Joel Payne and campus carry activist, founder of Empowered, Antonia Okafor. Joel, Antonia, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be with you, Liz.
Good to be with you.
All right, Antonia, let me turn to you first. This is a very interesting statistic, I think. Women in general are the fastest growing demographic of gun owners in America. Black women are now the fastest, even among women, the fastest racial demographic turning to guns for self-defense. Why is that, Antonia?
Absolutely. You know, I think it's important to say, regardless of what the stats show or what the media is saying right now, that it's not about Trump. It's not a political issue. It's really a self-defense issue. Women in general, like you were saying before, but particularly black women, are realizing in the places that they live that they're not safe, and they can't rely on the police. They can't rely on a father figure, which unfortunately a lot of them don't have in the home, or even a spouse in the home. They have to rely on themselves. And so the more that they're realizing that, and realizing that having a gun and gun ownership is this extension of their own independence, the more that black women are saying, you know what, yeah, I'm going to be a gun owner and I'm going to learn how to use it for self-defense.
Right. CJ Pearson is an 18-year-old conservative commentator. And yes, I said 18.
A determined teenager putting his words into action, raising money to help small black-owned businesses damaged during recent protests in downtown Atlanta. CJ Pearson is president and founder of Last Hope USA and joins us now. CJ, good morning. It's so great to have you here.
Good morning, Sandra. It's a pleasure to be here.
So CJ, what inspired you to step in and help out some of those businesses that have struggled during all of this.
Definitely. I had seen so many people posting black screens, but I thought, let's go actually do something. Let's go put some actions behind those words and go help people that are so badly in need. I watched so many videos of America burning each and every night, and it broke my heart to see. But it also broke my heart to see black-owned businesses suffering while people were chanting Black Lives Matter. And so to create this effort and to provide some of that relief was definitely something that I was happy to do. And it was incredible to see the response that it received.
Talk about the response that you received. I know we were showing images of Wilborn Sisters Design. Janice joined us. She was a guest on this program talking about the destruction to her store. I know you gave her a $10,000 check for her company. How did she respond?
She was immensely grateful, and I got to say, it was so great hearing from her. The Wilborn Sisters of Designs is a great Atlanta institution. They've given back to the Atlanta community so much over the course of many decades, and they are truly an Atlanta institution. When we first started to set out this effort, I set a goal for $30,000. I expected, to maybe raise that and be able to help a few businesses, but we blew through that goal in just 3 hours, raising more than $160,000 in 3 days. And it was truly, again, it blew me away to see the response that we received, but also it filled me with so much hope to be able to help so many people who need this relief now more than ever.
Most of you already know Candace Owens, the co-founder of Blexit, an organization designed to inspire more blacks to exit the Democrat Party.
Things that I said today that are actually harming Black America. Number one, father absence. Number two, the education system and the illiteracy rate. Illegal immigration ranks high, abortion ranks high, white supremacy and white nationalism, if I had to make a list again of 100 things, would not be on it. This hearing, in my opinion, is a farce, and it is ironic that you're sitting here and you're having 3 Caucasian people testify and tell you what their expertise are. Do I know what my expertise are? Black in America. I've been black in America my whole life, all 30 years, and I can tell you that you guys have done the exact same thing every 4 years ahead of an election cycle, and it needs to stop.
Believe it or not, she started from YouTube. Back then, her YouTube channel wasn't even her real name. Her channel name was Red Pill Black. Today, she's a political commentator for the Daily Wire. She's a mother, a wife, and also an author. Love Candace Owens. Now, when I said co-founder of Blexit, the person she co-founded it with is none other than Brandon Tatum.
So I just want to first of all say that I want to apologize to nobody. I'm not apologizing to nobody. Don't you apologize to these crybabies. All they do is sit around and cry and don't do nothing. And the first time that they get a problem, they're gonna dial 911. They're not gonna call Pookie, they're not gonna call James, they're gonna call 911. If you wanna have a real conversation, we can have a conversation. But don't sit out here and lie and be a coward. The men and women who put that uniform on are the most bold, courageous, selfless people on planet Earth. How do you know that, Mr. Tatum? Because I was a police officer. I put on the uniform. I put my life on the line every day for people that liked me and people that did not like me. People who were successful and people who were smoking crack every day. And I did it with a smile on my face, love in my heart, and a dedication to service. And that's exactly what police officers do on a day-to-day basis.
He's a former football player and police officer who brings a unique perspective to some of these police brutality stories. He's also a political commentator and an author. I got to meet Anthony Brian Logan at a Blacks for Trump event in Atlanta.
How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today I bring you an update on the Nicki Minaj Twitter kerfuffle. Now, I did a video about this a couple of days ago where I broke the initial story, and this all started from one tweet, and I'll place that on the screen before you in case you have not seen it or you need a quick refresher. All Nicki Minaj was saying is that the very expensive $275,000 per table Met Gala requires the shot, and she doesn't want to get the shot just to go there. If she's gonna get the shot, it'd be on her own terms, when she does research, when she feels comfortable. Now, I don't see why that's a bad thing to say. Rather than getting bullied into doing the thing, do it because you want to. Do it on your own terms. do your own research. And in that same tweet, she said, wear a mask. So we're not speaking about somebody that's necessarily super anti-vax in a stereotypical fashion. She still believes in the mask, and she said she recommends getting the shot in subsequent tweets, but apparently that wasn't enough. She got attacked from the left viciously. Joy Reid from MS13 DNC, she did an immediate reaction on air, finger wagging, how dare you, all this and that. A lot of celebrities on the internet, they attacked her. Regular normies, they were attacking her. It was crazy.
I recognized him immediately because of the current events videos he makes on YouTube. But he's been doing this a whole lot longer than I have. I see you, man. Much like Diamond and Silk, there are a few who've made somewhat of a comedy career out of the situation. The Hodge twins is one example, but another example is Terrence K. Williams. He's a comedian, and he's also an author. I'm glad I got to meet this gentleman before he passed away. Now, they call him Kingface. I never did Google to find out what his real name is. But this dude had a lot of promise. I mean, there's still a lot of videos on YouTube with him in it. He talked about his rough street life growing up and how he abandoned all of it for conservative principles. This guy was a real inspiration. You'll always be missed, bro. Coming a little closer to home, I remember when this guy was the Democrat CEO of DeKalb County, Georgia here. Fast forward a few years, and now this guy is body surfing at Trump rallies, and he's challenging the incumbent to become Georgia's next governor.
Vernon Jones throwing his hat into the Georgia governor's race. Jones making the announcement earlier today in front of a crowd of supporters. The former Democrat and former member of the Georgia House of Representatives gained notoriety recently as a supporter of former President Donald Trump. He's now looking to seize on the support and loyalty of Trump's conservative base in Georgia.
And what good is a subculture if you don't have musicians, right? You'll never forget meeting Bryson Gray. With his infectious laughter and silly hat and positive attitude, I'm certain this guy's gonna go far.
If you don't like this country, you can leave. If you don't like this country, you can leave.
I've seen more and more music put out by him on YouTube lately. Best of luck to you, my friend. And when is the last time you ever remember a campaign ad going viral? Well, that's what happened when Kim Klacik ran this ad about her hometown of Baltimore.
Do you care about Black lives? The people that run Baltimore don't. I can prove it. Walk with me. They don't want you to see this. I'm Kim Klacik. This is Baltimore, the real Baltimore. This is the reality for Black people every single day. Crumbling infrastructure, abandoned homes, poverty, and crime. Baltimore has been run by the Democrat Party for 53 years. What is the result of their decades of leadership? Baltimore is one of the top 5 most dangerous cities in America.
Ever since her ad went viral, I've seen at least 2 politicians try to copy it. She's definitely one to watch. I remember when this guy had a talk show like Ricky Lake and Oprah. I never knew he'd go on to be a 30-year radio talk show host and eventually run for governor of California.
Gloria crossed party lines because of the issue of school choice. We're spending $15,000 every year for students in our government schools in California. Notice I don't call them public schools, I call them government schools. $15,000 a year, some of the worst reading scores, some of the worst math scores. Only about 15 or 16 states spend more. And the students that are getting the raw end of the deal are the Black and brown students who comprise 80% of the government students in our government schools. They're getting the worst teachers, the worst principals, the worst administrators, the worst outcomes. What is the route from poverty to middle class? At least finish high school. One, presumably where you can read, write, and compute at grade level, and that is not happening.
Larry Elder is definitely an inspiration, and I have a feeling you haven't seen the last of him. Shout out to all my brothers and sisters who check behind the media, who read various sources, who visit places in person rather than taking someone's word. You are the definition of individual responsibility. You are the early adopters. In you, there is hope. In you, there's freedom. Well, we'll never get it all, but we unpacked a lot. Today we talked about why 2016 was a game changer for Blacks, not because of the Black participation in the last Republican election. We talked about the fact that there are more people who are willing to come out in public. It's one thing to pull that lever in private, but it's another thing to be able to put on a MAGA hat and go walk out in public. That's what I'm excited about. Republicans are getting bolder and bolder. More black people are starting to show that they seriously support the Republican cause. We talked about how we got here in the first place. How did we become Democrats when we used to be 77% Republicans? We talked about how those who don't know their past are doomed to repeat it. You should take a serious look into why the Democrat Party still calls themselves socialists. That's not a good look. We addressed some of the hurdles that's keeping us from returning to the Republican parties, and we actually refuted a bunch of those myths. And finally, we wrapped everything up by talking about the rise of the black conservative. So what about you? When are you making the switch? Well, this concludes today's podcast. Make sure you stick around for our next podcast, 5 Democrat Policies That Hurt You, because some of you are voting for your own destruction. I'll end this with some words from Milton Friedman. A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will have a high degree of both. I'm Rob Lett, and I approve this message.